Good evening, everyone. It is Monday, October 14th, and it is Canadian Thanksgiving. If you celebrate, all the best to you, your family, and your friends. And if not, why not reach out to those family and friends you haven't been talking to recently and wish them a good day? It's never too early to start and be the change that you want in your life. Today, I wanted to talk to you all about overclocking and the concept of performing more than what's normal. Now, from a computer sense, overclocking is increasing the default setting of your CPU to have increased performance for a shortened period of time. Now, why would a computer user need to do this? If you're a gamer, sometimes you need increased capacity to run certain video games or certain elements of a video game if you're playing single player. If you're someone in media, if you need extra power for Photoshop or something like Final Cut Pro, sometimes you would do this as well. If you're uploading a lot of information, sometimes you might need to have extra performance while running those applications. But usually it's a temporary measure. So think of a car as well. Every car, at least every car with a gasoline engine, will have a red line. Now, this is the safest maximum amount of RPM that an engine can handle before getting into the danger zone. Typically on a car, you'll shift between 50 to 60% of that maximum, and then it will go down to maybe 30 to 40% of that max RPM depending on what gear you're in. If you do hit the RPM, usually it's only for a short amount of time, and then you get out of that danger zone, right? And why would you do this in a vehicle? Typically, you would need it to get extra performance out of the vehicle, usually with extra acceleration, for some sort of temporary measure, right? So maybe you're going onto a highway and you really need to get as much speed as possible to match the speed of the highway, match the speed of the traffic on the highway. And yeah, or you could just be having fun with your friends. Maybe you're just racing up and down the side of the street. I'm not one to judge. But typically, hitting that red line is a very temporary thing. And you have to be careful because there are inherent dangers, which we will get into later in this video. Now, in your personal life, what does overclocking look like? This really means, typically for me, if you have a full-time job, say a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, this is either getting a second part-time job or a second full-time job, if you're crazy enough. And there's really a lot of reasons to do it, but let's start with reason number one. It's just immediate money. Let's face it, it's 2024. There's a lot of people struggling with finances. Costs keep going up. Groceries have slowed down a bit. Other bills have slowed down a bit as well. But let's face it, right? The cost of living isn't going to it's not going to go down to what it was before COVID. And some of those things could still spike as it is. So a lot of people need extra cash. If you have debt, it's a great way to do it. And you can use that extra cash to pay off those debts. Or if you have a mortgage or something like that you want to get rid of and you don't want those extra roommates, or if you don't have an extra space for roommates and you want to pay off extra towards your principal, this is a great way to do it too. So that's step number one. No, reason number one, rather, is more cash in your bank account. Other jobs or other avenues are also possible. Like say if you're a content creator, you had some sort of coaching business, some sort of consulting business, a trades business where you go door knocking and you're fixing people's stuff, that's great. But all those things either require capital or a lot of time to build up your brand name and your reputation. Whereas if you start working right away for someone else, you can get that cash injection right away and still do whatever that coaching or side business you want on the side as well. So that's step number one, immediate money. Now, rule number two, diversifying your skill sets. This is one I've learned a lot throughout my life. So I'm 29 years old. I grew up in Vancouver, BC. And this is something I learned a lot when I was working in my early 20s. Throughout my early 20s, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I went to university for 2 years and I didn't like it, so I left. And I decided, throughout my early 20s, I'm just going to work a bunch of odd jobs and see what I like. So a lot of times I'd be working a main job, say working in construction, and then on the weekends I'd be doing something else. Sometimes working security, sometimes I was a valet driver. I've been a limo driver on the weekends. And in these kind of miscellaneous jobs, you learn a lot. So obviously working in construction, I learned how to use some hand tools here and there. Working as a limo driver, I know how to use and safely operate limousines, but also things like small buses, medium buses. I know how to do basic pre-trip and vehicle inspections for commercial vehicles. I know how to keep a logbook. And obviously there's a lot more skills you can learn, but these are just some quick examples, right? Just depending on whatever you do. So maybe right now you're in a spot where you're like, you know what, maybe I'm working a job, but eventually I'd like to start my own business, and you want to have some sort of customer base for that and some customer service experience. Honestly, having a second job and overclocking it for a while is a great way. So let's say you're a programmer and you don't really interact with that many other people in your day to day. If you work a second job, say as a server, which we'll get into later, you're forced to be social. You're forced to talk to those customers, take orders, communicate with the kitchen on, what instructions need to go through, timing, right? How do you pick up all your food and deliver all the food at the same time so no one guest at the table is waiting? That actually takes quite a bit of skill, and that's pretty transferable. So it's another great way in how to diversify your skill sets, and specifically train skills that you might not be targeting in your main job. Point number 3, no obligations. And this is one that I loved throughout my early 20s when I was experimenting. So if I didn't like a job in my early 20s, I would just quit. Eventually, with construction, I was getting nervous about wear and tear on my body. I had some lower back pains, and I didn't want that to be exacerbated through the heavy lifting, so I quit. I learned a lot of I learned some skills on the tools, on how to diagnose problems, but I realized it was not for me. Same thing with being a security guard too, right? So I learned how to do accurate note taking, how to secure a premise, what to look for. If I wouldn't do the camera installations myself, but if they were, what would they look for in doing camera installations? So I can use that same knowledge when I buy my own property, or say if I have my own commercial property in the future, then I can use those same skill sets. So yeah, going back to the original point, no obligations. If you don't like something, you can just quit. If you're on your main job and you quit your 9 to 5, and that's your means of paying your rent or your mortgage and your other living expenses, there's a lot of pressure to fill that void right away, especially in this economy. I'm seeing it's very difficult for a lot of people to quit their main careers and transfer to something else right away. So it's a lot more dangerous. Whereas if you're playing with a side job and maybe that's 10 to 30% of your total income overall, sure, it would suck to lose that side job, but if you're quitting that to replace it with something else, there's no real harm. Especially if you're just using the extra money to go towards your goals. It's definitely, there's not as much risk. So in addition to gaining more skills, once you have those skills, you're saying, yeah, maybe the skill isn't for me, I don't need it. There's no harm in switching right away. Number 4 is forced productivity. Now, when you're working a second job, obviously, since time is finite, you only have so much extra time, free time for other things, whether it's extra chores, spending time with friends, maybe a loved one. You have to be more efficient with your time. And this is something that I don't think you can learn just working one job. I've pretty much throughout my whole entire 20s, I've worked 2 jobs. And yes, there's some dangers to that. And you lose a lot in terms of opportunities and experiences. But you also gain a lot, especially with family and friends, because when you do spend time, you might be a bit more sleepy, you might be a bit more tired or achy, but you know what? You'll enjoy it more too. Like, you'll be more tired, but kind of in a weird way, you'll actually start enjoying your time with them more because you realize how finite it is, right? So, you can get a lot out of it. There's the old adage saying, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. And I really think that's true. When you're always working, it kind of puts you in a mindset of always trying to think of the next thing to do. And that kind of leads me to point 5. And that I kind of, over time, after you've done overclocking, it will permanently increase your bandwidth. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's say, okay, you have your office job. Let's go back to that computer programming job. Let's say 40 hours a week is what your normal bandwidth is, right? And then you get a second job, say working at a bar, and now you're working extra 15 hours a week for temporary, say for 6 months. And you use that money and you save it up, and then you have that cash ready for whatever, right? Whatever you want to use it for. Even if you quit that job, that second bartending job, and because you don't need it anymore. Now your capacity for work could probably go up to 45 to 50. Maybe you're not doing the 55 or 60 that you were before when you were working those two jobs, but I'm telling you, after a certain amount of time, your permanent bandwidth for more work increases to 45 to 50 hours. And kind of like point four, these kind of things kind of play into each other. Increased productivity, and now you have additional working capacity, and to do more work in the first place, it means you're going to do more work faster over time. So things that you might be putting off. I don't know, say you change your furniture and you're like, oh, I don't want a furniture job. After overclocking, once you quit the job, you know what? Okay, let's make a plan. Let's get it done. Maybe it's sorting out some financial issues, whatever, right? Maybe you have to set up a debt payment plan, or maybe you want to invest better or something like that, or change your investment strategy. I swear your mind's going to think about that more, and you're going to be okay, let's go. And you're going to be more excited to do it, to go and get that done. Yeah, that's number 5. Those are the 5 things I look for in overclocking. Now, what are some good examples of overclocking? Number 1, and kind of the classic culprit of a second job, is hospitality. You know what? Obviously, it's a tough job economy right now, but restaurants and fast foods are always hiring. Whether you're working front of house, like serving, bartending, food running, being a busboy or bus girl, or working back of house, being a chef or cook, these jobs are always hiring. I initially, as a teenager, worked in the back of house, so I was a line cook, and then in my 20s, I transitioned and ended up working front of house. So I was doing food running, assistant serving. And although food running and kind of like the busboy serving life, you make more. You make your hourly, which is usually minimum wage, plus your tip outs. And between that, you'll make more than a chef. If you are having troubles getting into that serving industry, start as a chef. Chefs, you won't usually make minimum wage, you make a few bucks more. And plus, at the end of the night, you'll get a percentage of the tip outs of those servers. And generally, that's based on sales. So, say the restaurant did $15,000 in sales that day, and the servers have a 1% tip out for all food sales. That means the chefs would get $150 in tips collectively from all the different servers, and then that $150 would be split amongst all the chefs that were working during those hours. And that helps increase your average hourly. That's really typical amongst restaurant workers, but there's other ways too. So that's number 1, is serving and hospitality. Another example, security / night shifts. So night shifts could be including like overnight stalking, building receptionist, hotel, night auditor. There's a lot of different types of jobs. The benefit of working as a security kind of night shift person is that generally it's very low stress and not as stressful as the restaurant job. But the drawback is that typically you don't make as much. So it's a bit of a give and take. And this will take some time. You'll have to know kind of what your own maximum bandwidth, right? So it's like about 40 hours initially during your 9 to 5, and you maybe go up to 55, 60 with your second job. You might not know what kind of fits your lifestyle, right? So maybe your job during the week is pretty chill and you have the energy for something like a 9 to 5, or so you have the energy for something like a restaurant job, then go for it. But if your job is pretty intense and you're pretty exhausted by the end of the week, Friday night, you're like, oh my God, I can't think of, working until next Monday. Maybe you need a job that's a little more laid back and chill. So those are the 2 jobs I definitely recommend. Now, what are some of the dangers of overclocking? I've kind of alluded to the first one, and that's kind of burning out your components. On the computer, when I first talked about in this video, the dangers of overclocking your CPU for too long is that the CPU catches fire or somehow other malfunctions. It damages the computer. In your own body, this can look like a quick and rapid degradation of your mental health. And, it could lead to other things like sickness, easier to get stressed, your body's tight all the time, you're just kind of more miserable. And this is where you really have to know, okay, like how much extra work can I put in? into this job, and how much is it worth, right? It's like sometimes you might say, hey, listen, I have a lot of debt right now, and I know I'm going to be really stressed for a while working these two jobs. But you know what? The additional payments towards that debt balance is worth it to me. It's worth more to me than the additional cost of all that stress. Now, obviously, you don't want to do this forever. You want to do this maybe for as a short kind of stopgap, maybe a few months, a year, what have you. But it can work, right? Like there's going to be you can make it work, but there's going to be downsides, right? You're always going to have some sort of downsides when you increase your total work, but you really have to be in tune with your body and say, okay, how much work can I do? And if you do sense you are working too much, you really have to be, okay, how can I care for myself in order to counteract all the damage of that overclocking? Now, the second danger of overclocking is increased downtime. So let's just say you do have that kind of mental breakdown, or you get all this stress and you get sickness from these two jobs. You might have to take some time off in order to fully recharge. And when I say time off, then you really have to, completely de-stress, not think about work, and just do something different. This is important because you don't really know what's going to happen, right? So if you're not really paying attention to your kind of maximum capacity during your overclocking and what's safe to do so over time, then you run the risk of kind of needing a longer vacation. So maybe, in your typical office job, you really need, a week getaway to the resort or something was enough to kind of feel recharged. If you're overclocking, you're not paying attention, maybe it takes 10 days or 2 weeks. So you're having that additional time to recharge, and that can take away from your other productivity. But overall, in kind of closing this video, I really think there's a lot of benefit to overclocking. Yes, the monetary side is the most obvious, but there's a lot of other benefits too that you can use. And if you do it smart, as long as you're monitoring your mental health and kind of checking in with yourself and keeping your body, keeping your body, running well, and that's something I'll touch on in future videos, then I really don't see the issue. I've done it myself. I've used overclocking to either invest more in stocks, to pay off debt, to increase my budget for things like dating and or vacations, and it's worked well. And I've been able to increase the total amount of work I can do. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits to it. I encourage you to explore it. It's obviously not the only solution, but if you are in some difficulties right now, specifically financial difficulties, it's definitely an option. So let me know what you think. Leave a comment down below. If you like the video, send me a like, and yeah, we'll talk again soon. Thank you so much. Bye.